In Amsterdam, I might say this, and you're about ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. This is tape number 2, interview with Lydia Ostwald in Roanoke, Virginia, August 5th, 2003. When we ended before Lydia, your real fiancé had just left for the United States. And the authorities in Amsterdam were somewhat baffled because two of your fiancés were now in the United States.
Well, rightfully so. I would say.
Yes.
I would
So
be baffled also.
if you could pick up the story there and
Well, that's where it becomes very complicated.
and what happened to you then. Go ahead.
Yes, actually I had told him that while he has to go to the United States to re-establish himself, I would not want to stay in Holland by myself, because in Europe you knew that World War II was inevitable. It was a matter of time, of months, whatever. And I said, if it happens, I'd rather be in England with my family than alone in Holland without him.
And excuse me, at what point was this? 1939, do you know the month when he left approximately? The time?
Well, Harry went to re-establish himself in July. In between, though, we have not told the story where I was sent back and forth from Holland to England.
No.
And that was when I tried to visit my family in England.
So you had met him in January of
and
1939.
yes, and then approximately, I believe this might have been like April or
All right.
something like that. I tried to visit my family, and he took me, and and when I got to England, they did not let me enter. They said something was wrong with my entry visa, whatever I needed at the time. And I said, no, I don't think so. And they returned me to Holland on the same ship. And when they returned me to Holland, they became a little bit suspicious, and they threw me into a prison. And they said, why didn't they let you into England? And I said, I don't know. And they put me into solitary confinement.
My.
And my husband-to-be, Harry Ostwald, came on the drove to whether this was Hoek van Holland. I mean, at various points this happened to me. He drove, got me out of prison, and took me back to Amsterdam. And I tried to get again to go. This time they put me in prison in England. They wouldn't let me enter. And then they shipped me back to Holland, and in Holland they put me into solitary confinement. And they shipped me back and forth 2 or 3 times until they thought I was a spy.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
So I had this in my, the police had to handle that also in Amsterdam, you know, that was added to my beautiful file. So I could not get back from England somehow. They would put me into prison. So we decided that my husband, that I would go to Belgium. And maybe in Belgium they wouldn't arrest me. I went to Belgium, and my husband was there with a car, and he smuggled me.
He was not yet your husband.
No, my husband-to-be, Harry Osborne. And he smuggled me in his car with his American passport and, you know, and his Dutch traveling papers and his Dutch driver's license. He took me back to Amsterdam. He actually smuggled me back into Holland. So there I was again with that police. I was again on that. And now he came and he said he has to go to America for several weeks to establish his American citizenship.
Because he lacked the birth certificate.
Yes, he did not have the birth. He had a traveling paper, but that was really not enough, and he could not possibly, you know, I couldn't travel on that. And if I married him, I would lose my citizenship. So he left in July, and he was coming back the beginning of September. And I remember saying, Harry, if you come in September, I'm going to go to England and stay with my family there because World War II is breaking out. And he changed his return date to the last day of August. And I stayed in Holland, and the police said I could stay in Holland if every single day while he is gone, I would report to the police. And while he was gone, for the length of time he was gone and was in America, was what, several weeks, I had to go to the police on a daily basis. Because, they didn't trust me from here across the road. I mean, they wanted to get rid of me somehow or the other.
At this point, he really could have stayed in America, and he might have.
Well, his business he still had a business.
Right.
His partner had left because he was an American. His partners were Jewish, so they had left, and they had established a new business on Fifth Avenue. And there was one partner left in Europe. Berlin was closed, and Amsterdam. In Antwerp.
Oh.
Antwerp was the other one. Antwerp and Amsterdam. Berlin was closed, and they opened a new one on Fifth Avenue. But his partner from Berlin was already in New York.
I see. And the company.
And they wanted my husband there to take care of the business. So when I came into the picture, I said, I will not stay in Europe. I want to go to America, you see. That's when he really seriously started to close his business, but you can't close a business overnight. And anyhow, he returned on the end of August, and World War II started on September the 2nd, 1939. And I was married on September 6, 1939, and the police said to me, and I will never forget the words, we know that this is only a marriage of convenience, it will never last, you just want to get out of the country. Well, to make a long story short, I was married for 48 years to the same man and had a wonderful, wonderful life with him. And also had 2 children, and now have grandchildren also. So it was a wonderful, wonderful life. Now Hitler invaded. Now this was September 1939, and my husband gradually was unwinding his business and was getting ready to immigrate to America. And here I have my documents that we had, asked for my permission to come to the United States and so on and so forth. No, I don't think this is a document, but I have various documents which I can show you later.
Yes.
And we started, I believe, in January of 1940, where it became serious, and we had notification that I would be eligible to get an immigration visa to America, and I get a preferred quota because he's a citizen. But by marrying my husband, I have to make this clear, the German law states that when you marry, at least it's stated at that time, I do not know, that might have changed it, if you marry a foreigner, you lose your German citizenship. American law said, which was done in 1922, as I just learned through these documents, they had changed the law, and they said you do not become an American citizen by marrying an American, you have to be naturalized. However, if you marry an American, instead of 5 years, it will take 3 years to become a naturalized American.
So by marrying him, you automatically lost
my citizenship.
Your German citizenship.
And the Germans took my passport. I have no longer a passport.
They took it away from you.
Yes, good luck with a J in it. But, they had my passport, and I was somebody without a country, which during normal times I would think would not be as difficult. But we are talking now about World War II, and I'm in January, and we are starting all the, we had written to the American authorities, and I had all my papers in order within the next 2 months, I believe, where I had permission to come, where I had my immigration number, and everything was totally in order, and every paper was given to the embassy. I'm sure it was the embassy, not the consulate, in Rotterdam.
Mm-hmm.
And we had figured by the end of the year, during that year, we would finally, finalize everything and leave for America. Unfortunately, in May of 1940, Mr. Hitler invaded Holland.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you have to realize that the entire West Front had fallen by then. This was after Dunkirk. I don't know
in June, Dunkirk.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
The
Dunkirk.
beginning of June.
Beginning of June.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Hitler was in Germany after Dunkirk. Okay,
In
but
Holland.
He was already in Holland, but he was, the entire. When we left Holland, the entire Western Front had fallen,
Mm-hmm.
broken down. But Hitler came into Holland on whether it was May the 4th or May the 6th, I cannot tell you.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember waking up. We lived in the only skyscraper in Amsterdam. And I woke my husband up. It was 4 or 5 in the morning. I said, something is very funny outside. I said, nothing. And again, half-hour later, I hear this dreadful noise. I said, it's nothing. And I opened the curtains, and there, the paratroopers are just coming down. The sky is black, with what's coming out of the heavens. And I say to my husband, my goodness gracious, we are being invaded. He says, good, the English are landing. But it was he was such an optimist. The English are landing. Mr. Hitler landed in Holland. And of course, things started to change dramatically. And it was really dreadful because they had the low-flying planes, and they were flying very low and really shooting the civilians that were in the street,
Mm-hmm.
And we went to Rotterdam 2 days after Hitler had invaded it. And I have to say, so far as your eyes could see, there was nothing left of the city. It was totally pulverized. And the fire and heat had been so enormous that even these safes in the embassy had melted. And there was nothing left, nothing but ashes. So I had no papers. Now I'm sitting with Hitler.
Those
I have no
hard-won
papers left.
papers.
All my documents are gone. They were all there, and I have no passport, and I'm without a country, and I'm sitting there in World War II. So what to do in order to get out of Europe? And this is incredible. There was a consul in Amsterdam who wrote a piece of paper, and this is the piece of paper, which is nothing but actually my statistics that he wrote on a piece of paper.
In English.
Yes, in English. Gave them all in English.
Lydia Ostwald, née Seligman, being duly sworn, deposes and says that her name is, etc.
Yes.
Okay.
And my
Your picture.
and the picture, and then here the American seal. Now
was
this
the
was
American consul.
no, this is a consul in Amsterdam.
Yes.
And we were a little bit friendly with them. Okay.
The American consul.
Yeah, the
in
American consul.
Amsterdam.
But in Rotterdam, he was the worst anti-Semite that I've ever come across in my entire life, and I'm going to be 88 years old. That man did everything under his power to try and prevent me from entering this country. Whatever he could, he tried. I was very fortunate he did not succeed. Now I had a piece of paper, and you have to realize that this was nothing but a piece of white paper, and I had this piece of paper that the consulate had given me, and I had to get transit visas through so many countries in order to leave Holland.
Mhm.
I was one of we were 11 people, 10 Americans, and Lydia Ostwald were allowed to leave Holland. But the Americans all had their passports, of course.
Mhm.
Now I had to get transit visas because the Germans actually told us how we have to travel. The normal thing would have been to go through the Ruhr into France and very fast, into Portugal. No, we had to go from Amsterdam to Berlin, from Berlin to Munich. I mean, it's going like,
Backwards.
it's going backward. And from Munich into Switzerland. But and then from Switzerland we had to travel through France, from France into Spain, from Spain into Portugal. But you have to realize this is in World War II, there is nothing left. There isn't a bridge left anywhere in that part of the world. In France, there is not a bridge left. And so it would be most difficult. But to get this visa, I went to the American consul first. He said no. I went to every country, and they refused to put a transit visa on this piece of paper. And I was sitting in a streetcar, and I was besides myself. And next to me sat a very lovely lady, another good German. And she said, "What is it?" And I really was crying. And I said, I cannot get a visa. She was a German. She worked for the German, I don't know whether it was the German embassy, whatever she worked for, but she was a German under Hitler. She says, "Come and I will give you
In
the
Amsterdam?
In Amsterdam. She was the first one to put the visa on. This is the visa from Germany.
Which one is that?
That is the one with the swastika.
Oh, okay.
Can't
Let's
miss
show it to the camera.
This
You
is
need
the
you to tilt
one.
it down.
That's this one.
Need it to tilt this way.
Like this?
Yes.
That's this one that has
The
the
swastika.
I
swastika.
see.
That was the
So
first.
she stamped this
Yes.
paper?
And once I had that, everyone followed and gave me transit visas because I had the German transit.
So that you could cross borders.
Cross borders, and they said for 2 or 3 days, whatever
Mhm.
was
So
necessary.
in Amsterdam, you secured these various transit visas.
Yes, I got them in Amsterdam.
So instead of a passport, this became your passport.
This became my passport. This piece of paper was my passport, and I have all the visas here from all the countries that we traveled through at the time, which is
Interesting.
absolutely amazing. But I could only use this piece of paper in connection with my husband's passport,
Right.
which is very important as the story unfolds. Now my husband, where's my brush?
Do you remember this lady's?
Over there.
Do you remember this lady's name?
No, I never saw her. I never saw her again. I saw her in a streetcar. Now my husband.
Really?
Yes.
And what did she do for you?
She said, "You come. I will do
Come
this."
to my office.
Yes, she says, "You come to the
And
German
she
embassy."
started.
Well, it never occurred to me to go to the German embassy first, as a Jew,
Mhm.
to get out of Holland.
Mhm. Right. Okay. So, tell us what happened then. So your husband, you had a car, and your husband had his passport, and you finally had this.
I had this
Page
piece
with
of paper, but
transit
my
visa.
husband then sat down by drawn curtains. We had blackouts at night, you must not forget it. And my husband took this brush, which at the time, and he cut this brush in half, as you can see, and he hollowed it out. And into this space, he could fit a dollar bill. I'm not going to tell you the denominations, but he could fit 10 in here.
And
They
they
had
were
the room.
large bills.
They were large bills. He fit 10 bills in here, closed it with artificial wood, then put it together with tiny, tiny nails, repainted it, And I used it for 2 weeks. It was really not the nicest looking brush because it was full of hair. I never took a hair out. And I was the one who eventually, under the death penalty, you could not carry anything, carried this through Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And we had examinations, I believe you me, where they went into every edifice at the various
Every
points.
orifice of your body.
Every. It went everywhere. But I think nobody wanted to touch this. So we carried it out, and in Switzerland we opened it, and since the Germans had only allowed each of us, first of all, they had given us a weight, I don't know, of 45 pounds, what we could take out, a tiny suitcase, and they had given us permission to carry out $250 each. But you have to realize that we were traveling before we got onto a ship for 6 weeks through war-torn Europe, and we had to wait in Portugal for the ship for weeks and weeks. For $250, it was an impossibility. The cheapest ship transportation to America on a ship at the time was a mattress on a floor for $350. Now that in that year was a lot of money. Mm-hmm. Cannot compare to what it is now. But it was a lot of money, $350. You got a mattress on a floor. So I don't have to tell you anything else when you have to travel now and stay for 6 weeks in Europe for $250. But we got through Germany, and we were very, very fortunate. Before leaving Holland, there were various Jewish Dutch families who asked me to take certain things to New York. And all I could say, or to America for them, I said, if I get through Germany, I promise you it will be delivered. But I cannot give you a promise because I do not know what the Germans will take away. But I was very lucky because I was fortunate enough to be able to bring these pieces that were entrusted to me and bring them to America and deliver them to these families.
That's amazing.
Yes. And
was this something that you could hide, like you could hide
the one
money?
was a tremendous diamond brooch. But I said, I'm just going to stick it on a piece of clothing and let it go through, And nobody will think that it could be a real diamond pin because nobody in their right mind would do that. Sure enough, they never thought it was real jewelry.
And it went.
And it went, yes.
Wow.
It went. I was able to bring it. Well, once we got into Switzerland, my husband opened this brush, and we were able to sustain the rest of our travel companions. With money, we helped them. And
were they in the car with you, or how?
Well, we all traveled together. We were all like one family practically. They were all strangers. We had never seen any of them. There was one Jewish family, and they traveled with 2 children, and they were diamond people from Amsterdam. We stayed in contact with them afterwards. The rest of the people they were non-Jewish. I cannot tell you. But I have to say that every one of them was honest and repaid my husband. There was not one person that was dishonest. Whatever, the minute they got to America, they paid my husband.
I'm trying to picture this flight into Switzerland and beyond with
Well, we
other
didn't
people.
fly.
No,
We were
I
on a
know
train.
your flight.
Yeah, my flight.
Figuratively.
Yes.
You were in an automobile.
No, on a train.
On a train, I see.
We arrived in Berlin, from Amsterdam and Berlin. We arrived at the station at the time when all the victorious German troops had returned to Germany.
I see.
And there they were on the same in the same thing. And of course my girlfriend Louise was at the station. She came. What a friend. I mean, she is a righteous person. And she was there to say goodbye to me. She was in Berlin as we came through. And we got to Switzerland, and it was wonderful. In Geneva, we were in Geneva, went through Geneva, and then unfortunately we went into France, and that was a catastrophe. Because there we had to go by buses, and there were no bridges. There was nothing left. And by the tens of thousands we saw the refugees, who were walking the roads. And I know we had to spend the night before getting to the south of France, and we slept. Not only were there bugs in the bed, but they had never been changed. The linens had never been changed, and the conditions were incredible. And then we got to the south of France, and from there on we took buses into Portugal, which was the which is the let's see, when you go through the customs to go into Spain. And part of it this was on buses too, and the bus driver got drunk. And it is a tiny road, a two-lane road through the Pyrenees. Pyrenees are very high mountains, and they're above the Mediterranean. And how we made it alive, I will never know. And when we got into Portugal, the American ambassador from Italy was there, and we really had no place to sleep. And he was very kind. He had a big entourage, and of course he had so many rooms. He gave my husband and I a room. He was just lovely. He was the opposite of the gentleman in Rotterdam.
The American ambassador.
Ambassador to Italy. Yeah, he was unusually fine and unusually nice. I do not know his name. I know there were several children with him, and a wife, and so many people, but he traveled in style. Now we entered Spain, and that was another catastrophe. They had just gone through the Civil War. People had nothing to eat. I remember sitting down in a cafe, and they must have left maybe a cigarette butt and maybe a tiny fruit, and after we got up, people took the cigarette butt and ate the food that we had left on our plates. It was horrifying, because the bullet holes were in every building, and it was pantomime. It really was. What they had suffered through that revolution was not to be believed. And of course, Franco was now in power, Mr. Franco, and we got to Madrid on the train, and we were on our way to Portugal. And we had they have first, second, and third class compartments. And we, I believe, had a third class compartment. That's all we could get. So my husband must have gone out onto it was midnight. He went onto the platform to buy a pillow. Now I can only relate the story I heard from him. That he wanted to buy the pillow, and there was another gentleman who pulled the pillow from him. He pulled it back, this gentleman pulled back. My husband had a bad temper. I can imagine what happened, okay? He hit this gentleman and hit him again, and this gentleman fell down. And all I know, I was sitting on the train going to freedom in Portugal, when my husband comes under the arms of two police officers and is being arrested, and they're taken his suitcase out at midnight in Madrid, taken it out of the train. Can you believe it? And I said, I can't travel without him. I have to go I have to go with him to prison. And I said, you were not arrested, you cannot go to prison.
And
they took him off, and they left me in Madrid on the station, midnight, And when we came into Spain, you at the time had very strict laws about money laws, and you had to exchange so much money, and they wrote it down. And I have a document here that tells us how much money we exchanged. And when you left, you had to exactly say how much you spent and where you spent it. The reason was that outside Spain, you could buy, I think they were pesetas, much cheaper than within Spain. So of course, a lot of people bought their pesetas outside Spain and spent a lot of money in Spain then, and this was not very good for the economy. So you had so much, and then you had to say where do you spend it, and had to bring, if you stayed in a hotel, you had to bring a bill. If you stayed and ate lunch, you had to bring a bill that knew exactly how much you had spent. So they could figure out whether you had used outside money. So I'm standing on this platform, my husband disappears, I don't have a dime, and like a jerk, I'm saying to one of the American travelers, hand me some money. So they didn't think either. They took money and they handed it to me. Now they were short getting to the border. And we had heard where people were incarcerated and sitting in no man's land there in Spain.
It all didn't add up.
It didn't add up. So I had this plus money all of a sudden sitting there. What to do? So I don't speak Spanish. And I went to a taxi and I had this little suitcase. And I said, American embassy. What am I going to say? So they took me there, and they had a big party, and I think the consul came out, or secretary or somebody, and I have to say they were wonderful. He took me, and he took me to a hotel, and he put me up in this hotel, and he says he will take care of it in the morning, whatever happened to my husband. And he left and probably went back to his party. But the minute he left, the owners of this little hotel came and took this was my life. My visas, my American visa. They took that. They took that out of my hand, and they took that, and I sat alone in Madrid without a visa to America, without a visa to Portugal, my husband being in prison. I don't have to tell you, I don't think I closed my eyes that night.
I'm sure. May I ask one question? You were heading for Portugal because that was port of debarkation for you. How did you had already booked passage on a ship?
No, you couldn't.
No, you couldn't. You
just,
it was just the place?
The only place to go.
The only place.
The only place where there is no other, where could you leave from?
The
entire country? The only neutral country that had a port.
Okay, so that was the place.
That is the only place that you could leave. There were no other countries in Europe.
Go ahead.
To
so
go,
there
to
you
go
were,
west now, I'm not
without
saying.
Your precious...
Without my precious, I'm sitting all night. And to make a terrible story even worse, the secretary came back the following morning and told me, Mrs. Ostwald, unfortunately, I cannot get release for your husband, and the reason is the following. The man he hit on the station,
over the pillow,
was in civilian clothes, but he was a high Franco, he was an officer in the army, and he was over 60 or 65, which is a crime anyhow, to begin with, in Spain, if you hit anybody over that age. So he could not do anything. And he said, we have further news that the Spanish have told us you have to leave the country. I said, I can't leave the country. I can't travel without my husband. I have to sit in no man's land someplace. They said, I will not let you stay here. You have to leave by tomorrow. They will let you stay until tomorrow. Well, that was the end of my story. And I don't cry easily to this very day. Very rarely do I cry. I went into a restaurant and I broke down and I cried. And I mean I cried because I did not know what to do. Alone in the world. My husband in a prison. I couldn't talk to him, I couldn't see him. He was underground someplace. And this gentleman got up in a uniform, handsome gentleman, came to my table and he says, "Can I help you?" in Spanish. And I said, "No, I don't speak Spanish, I speak French." He says, "I speak French." So we were talking in French, and I told him what had happened to me, that my husband was in prison, that I am a German Jew, that I'm on my way to America, I cannot travel without him. And he said not to worry, he would get my husband out of prison. He must have been some very high official. And within 2 or 3 hours, my husband was released from prison. Now, do you think somebody was watching over me?
Amazing. It's simply amazing.
Is that amazing?
Sitting in a restaurant.
In a restaurant, and a total stranger, a handsome man in uniform, comes to my table and asks me what he, could he help me?
Charmed, in a way.
I was, I'm telling you,
charmed.
It's just incredible, my life. When I think about it, how many wonderful things have happened to me, strangers who were so fantastic to me. And my husband was released, but now I said, look, I'm afraid that the people who gave us the money might be held in no man's land because we had heard these horror stories. Let's go to a bank and get it verified, at least that they gave me the money when we get to the border, and there should be there that we can get them out of their trouble, you see. They had taken all my luggage along with them too.
Oh.
Forgotten to tell you, that stayed on the train. So, and we went to the bank, and there again they said they can't do it, and for the second time I cried. And it helped. They put it into my passport, they gave me a stamp that these people had given me that money, and that in case they were at the border, they would be released. But we left Spain for Portugal. We got to the border, and our friends, everybody had gotten through, so it was unnecessary. Not unnecessary, but we didn't need this. And
they didn't need it.
Yes, they didn't need that. And we were in Portugal, and we did not stay in the capital. We went to Estoril because we were told that it would take 6 weeks to, 4 weeks before we would get a ship. And yes, so we were, I think, approximately 4 to 5 weeks in Portugal. And we went to Estoril, which was a delightful place, and we must have gambled there, found something, We were at a gambling casino here. And we had a very, very good time in Portugal. And we finally got onto a ship, and I arrived in this wonderful country on Labor Day 1940. And I kissed the ground. But I kissed the ground in Ellis Island because, again, my husband walked through and they held me there for about 48 hours. So I was in Ellis Island also, which was not the greatest place to be. But I was in America, and I arrived, and my husband would not live in New York. He refused. He did not want to live in New York. And we ended up in Roanoke, Virginia. And I have been very grateful that I have raised my family here and have made so many wonderful friends, and I'm grateful for my life. I'm thanking all my friends, and I'm thanking all the American people for what they have done, because I've lived here now for 62 years, and I'm most grateful for having had this wonderful life.
What a story. We're not quite finished. A few questions, Lydia, I have to ask you. I counted altogether really 9 points at which people, often strangers, helped you.
Yes.
Some you knew. Have you ever seen them again? Which ones were you
The only
in
one
touch
that I
with?
saw again was Louise Krete-Stöder. And she visited me in this country in 1951, I believe it was, according to this newspaper story. And yes, 51. and she stayed with me for 9 months.
9 months.
9 months
Here in Roanoke.
in Roanoke.
Let's turn it so that the camera can see this picture
Well, should I take this off?
of you. That's fine. You can take it off.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
because there's a date on it.
And also the headline.
I would say that she was really a righteous Christian.
Mhm.
You should tilt it this way.
Tilt it like this. Good. After 13-year lapse, woman meets benefactor who saved life in Europe from Germany, who saved life in escape from Europe, from Germany. It's hard to read. Can you see it?
Mhm.
The camera can read it all right?
Mhm.
All right, it's just the reflection.
You're right.
Thank you.
The reflection's coming and going.
Yeah, we'll put that on the back. Another question, Lydia, a few more questions. When did you first tell your harrowing experience to others, including your children?
My
You-
children
you
know
have-
very little.
You have,
Very little.
who are your children? Two, you have
I have two daughters,
Mhm.
and I can't burn. I never wanted to tell them. I have to also say that I never spoke German in my house. Of course, it was World War II. I never spoke German to my husband. We only spoke English, and
Mhm. They didn't know.
that I told
Much.
them very little. I have told them very little on my desk. They can go into my safe deposit box and they can see my life and see the documents if they're interested.
They haven't seen these documents?
No.
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 So they will now see your videotape.
Well, they can see my videotape, and I love my children with all my heart, and my grandchildren, and I hope that their life will be a very, very good one, and that they realize how fortunate they are to have been born in this country and to have lived their life in this country.
What one lesson should we learn from remembering all this? Excuse me.
Well, I can say only this. I had always learned, Jewish people through the centuries have never owned land. And the reason that they have not owned land is because it's something you cannot take along. We have been persecuted through the centuries, and unfortunately at this stage I have to say we will be persecuted again. It's not the end, because that I don't know.
Your view of the future?
Yes, the view of the future is it's very grim. My view of the future personally is a very grim one. And if you don't have a scapegoat, we are going to be the scapegoat again. We have not owned land because we were not allowed to own land to begin with. They always say, why